I have been fact-checked by the big pharma-backed fact-checkers, and now I'm going to dismantle the low science claims made against my well-sourced report because, well, I stand by it, but it turns out that the fact-checkers are guilty of the very biases that they purportedly scrutinized me for, which included cherry-picking, sharing misleading information, and providing inadequate evidence. Let's dig in. Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News. Now, before we get to the actual rebuttal, let's do a little dive into the website dedicated to this particular fact check called healthfeedback.org. It outsources debunks to experts and is an offshoot of climatefeedback.org, which is overseen by the nonprofit organization called Science Feedback, whose mandate is to debunk false claims about the climate and fact-check scientific news articles to show where they apparently deviate from facts. Now, this might get a little bit into the weeds, but these so-called independent fact-checkers want their big pharma and big tech ties to be so intertwined that it becomes almost impossible to untangle them. But I have unraveled what I can to the best of my ability, so hang tight. Health Feedback is part of the Poynter Institute's International Fact-Checking Network, the IFCN, which was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Omidyar Network, and George Soros's Open Society Foundations, etc., as reported by the New York Post to, simply, silence dissent. In 2020, Poynter received $15,985 in government grants and just over $7.2 million in other contributions. In 2021, they received $1.6 million in government grants and a more mediocre $5.6 million in other contributions. That's a massive jump in government funding, almost as though the government needed to pay someone to discredit skeptics of their own health programs in that year. But the conflicts from this independent fact checker get even worse. Poynter also receives support from organizations like the Google News Initiative, funded exclusively by Google and its parent company Alphabet Inc., who partnered with vaccinefinder.org, government agencies, and pharmacies to ensure access to authoritative information. In doing that, they also conducted nearly 10,000 fact checks of sources appearing in search in Google News and invested in organizations working to stop the spread of misinformation through Google News' initiative's COVID-19 Vaccine Counter Misinformation Open Fund. Additionally, in 2021, Alphabet Inc. gave more than $100 million in ad grants to the CDC, World Health Organization, and nonprofits to promote vaccine education, public service announcements, and partnered with Gavi, which is Bill and Melinda Gates' Global Vaccine Alliance organization. Google and Alphabet also created a healthcare technology company called Verily, which launched in 2017 before launching Google Health in 2018. The main focus seems to be to organize the world's health and medical information through data mining. It has strategic collaboration deals with pharma giants like Novartis, Pfizer, and Gilead Sciences. It's clear that Google, alongside Alphabet, which also owns YouTube, is spending billions to become a force in healthcare. As reported by The Economist in 2022, so far this year it has injected $1.7 billion into futuristic health ideas, according to CB Insights, a data provider, leaving its fellow tech giants in the dust. Google dominates internet searches, where it accounts for 92.4% of internet searches globally, meaning that it already has substantial access to personal data, and now it's added to its repertoire with medical and health information too. So this obviously conflict of interest riddled organization has fact-checked my previous report that sourced manufacturer and government data. The science feedback debunker herself is scientist Flora Teo, who is a science editor at the publication. Unsurprisingly, she is also conflict of interest riddled. Teo received her PhD from a Singapore university, worked thereafter with the Asian Scientific magazine where she promoted drinking and discussing science, and has done pretty low-level scientific work ever since. Teo's LinkedIn profile says that she completed a stint in the Digital Sherlock's program run by the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab and continues to learn about open source intelligence techniques for studying mis- and disinformation. The Atlantic Council's founding donor is philanthropist Adrienne Arsh in conjunction with, the Rockefeller Foundation's Resilience Center, which includes notable honor roll funders like Facebook, the United States Department of Defense, Google, Pfizer, Global Affairs Canada, Merck, etc. The bulk of their support comes from corporate sponsors. So that's where Teo formed bias from. All right, so she debunks my claims as follows. Claim number 1, that natural immunity provides broad spectrum protection that persists for decades. Teo claims my sourcing, wherein I refer back to 160 plus studies utilized by research methodologist and epidemiologist Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, as inadequate and cherry-picked. Teo then cherry-picks 3 out of the nearly 200 list, as it's grown since it was first written, and refers to them as evidence that natural immunity does not provide broad-spectrum immunity by honing in on variant-specific studies, which was never part of the claim. We also have no idea how long-term variant-specific immunity lasts, since they are, new variants. What I refer to is broad-spectrum immunity. It's been shown to persist for decades, as I originally stated, especially in one of the studies that Teo pulls from. The Nature Journal study on persistent T-cell immunity shows that patients who recovered from SARS possess long-lasting memory T-cells that are reactive to the N protein of SARS-CoV 17 years after the outbreak of SARS in 2003. These T-cells displayed robust cross-reactivity to the N protein of SARS-CoV-2. She then states that natural infection runs the risk of infection and death as though vaccination is 100% safe and effective, while making the unsubstantiated claim that getting vaccination is a safer way of acquiring protection compared to getting infected. Teo also fails to mention that vaccinating people who have natural immunity offers little benefit and possible harms. They've been published here, and here. Claim number 2, wherein independent microbiologist and genomics expert Kevin McKernan analyzed both Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccine vials, which found undisclosed DNA plasmids, which have the potential to integrate into the human genome potentially permanently. Teo says that there is inadequate evidence to support this. She sources undisclosed experts who told her that this couldn't possibly be true. Her experts disagreed with my expert, and so obviously the fact checkers must be right. Teo says that the provenance of the vials was unknown, but she didn't reach out to me for clarification. The vials were sourced directly from a pharmacy, and researchers in Germany have reproduced the sequencing. Another German biologist found massive DNA contamination in Pfizer vials, up to 354 times the allowable limit as recommended by the World Health Organization's own 10 nanogram per dose DNA limit threshold. Full residual bacteria plasmids were also found. If we needed even more confirmation of this discovery, University of South Carolina's Professor Dr. Philip Buchholz recently testified before the South Carolina Senate Medical Affairs Committee that he found the same.
The Pfizer vaccine is contaminated with plasmid DNA. It's not just mRNA. It's got bits of DNA in it. This DNA is the DNA vector that was used as the template for the in vitro transcription reaction when they made the mRNA. I know this is true because I sequenced it in my own lab. The vials of Pfizer vaccine that were given out here in Columbia, one of my colleagues was in charge of that vaccination program in the College of Pharmacy, and for reasons that I still don't understand, he kept every single vial. So he had a whole freezer full of the empty vials. Well, the empty vials have a little tiny bit in the bottom of them. He gave them all to me, and I looked at them. We had 2 batches that were given out here in Columbia, and I checked these 2 batches, and I checked them by sequencing. And I sequenced all the DNA that was in the vaccine, and I can see what's in there. And it's surprising that there's any DNA in there, and you can kind of work out what it is and how it got there, and I'm kind of alarmed about the possible consequences of this, both in terms of human health and biology, but you should be alarmed about the regulatory process that allowed it to get there.
Claim number 3, the media also says that it's safe to mix and match vaccines to administer them concurrently, but the package insert never established this to be safe, for which I source the manufacturer's own package inserts. Teo incorrectly focuses on the statement where the vaccine shouldn't be mixed in the same syringe used to administer the COVID-19 vaccine, which is obviously different from what I reported on. In case it isn't clear to TO, they even reiterate this point on page 46 of the SpikeVax product monograph. There is no information on the use of SpikeVax with other vaccines. Tell your healthcare professional if you have recently received any other vaccine. TO then refers to the exact thing I criticized in a previous report, that administering COVID-19 vaccines concurrently, that is at the same time as other vaccines, is based on convenience, not science, and is more cost-effective and ensures higher uptake. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, confirms this in the latest Moderna booster authorization announcement.
Provinces and territories, for the most part, are planning to be able to provide both vaccines at the same time. And so that may increase access and uptake, make it more convenient for people. So one visit, two vaccinations at the same time. And as I've said in my opening remarks, it is safe to provide both vaccines at the same time as well.
Co-administration is not based on science, and NACI itself notes this. All things that I have pointed out in my previous reports using their own data. TO further claims that there are already published studies on this subject, and these don't detect health concerns from such a practice, but she fails to source any of these studies. And Canada's own vaccine reporting system found that there was a safety signal for this exact thing. Look at this from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization when discussing the stroke risk to elderly patients. Further investigation into the signal in the VASD, that's Vaccine Safety Database system, revealed that it was seen with concurrent administration of Pfizer-BioNTech bivalent vaccine in high dose or adjuvanted influenza vaccines, but not with administration of standard dose influenza vaccine or when the bivalent Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was administered alone. They also found that higher reactogenicity has been observed following concurrent administration of original mRNA COVID-19 vaccines with influenza vaccination compared to influenza vaccination alone, but that's okay because reactogenicity was comparable to receipt of the COVID-19 vaccine alone, even if that meant that concurrent administration resulted in a reduced immunological response. But don't worry, because NACI continues to monitor the safety of concurrent administration of COVID-19 vaccines, so I guess trust the science. Claim 4 is apparently misleading because the admission by TO that it was in fact correct, wherein I mention that the original Omicron booster was only tested on 8 mice before being injected into billions of people. TO says that because the new boosters are similar in composition to those earlier boosters, and they underwent clinical trials, which oddly, despite a completion date of May 25th earlier this year, they don't have any of their results posted. She then conflates yearly flu vaccines with novel mRNA boosters. Claim 5, TO says it's misleading and misrepresents sources when I question if pregnant women are at high risk for severe COVID infection outcomes, wherein I sourced the Canadian COVID Care Alliance's Protect Pregnancy campaign video that debunks the CDC's pregnancy study because it turns out that 64.5% of the study participants weren't even classified as being pregnant. TO calls this a valid criticism, then goes on to source 2 studies and alludes to them being more up to date, which found that pregnant women who become infected are more likely to develop complications, including preeclampsia and preterm birth, and are more likely to die. At least she calls them pregnant women instead of birthing people, so that's a win for science, I guess. However, the first study is a low-level retrospective cohort study that used database codes to examine patient characteristics and maternal outcomes associated with COVID-19 infection among pregnant patients who delivered during early pandemic periods in the United States. It was done between April and December 2020, so COVID was determined by variants that are no longer in circulation, and it's unclear what diagnostic tools were used since it's a database query. The authors compared unmatched groups of highly unequal sizes. While the total number of pregnant women enrolled was over 2.5 million, 98.2% of them were actually COVID negative. The authors found differences in COVID-positive pregnant women, including younger age, race, lower income, comorbidities, and homelessness. However, their methodology of statistical correction can be criticized for incorrect interpretations. For instance, they report deaths, which is the worst possible outcome, as a number per 100,000 deliveries when there were only 45,425 deliveries in the COVID-positive group. So that actual rate of death in that group would be approximately half of that calculated, which is insufficiently low to allow for adequate analysis. Moreover, the authors conclude that key limitations included lack of information on COVID-19 infection status, neonatal outcomes, delivery indication, and cause of death, after asserting that there is a greater than 10-fold increased maternal mortality risk associated with COVID-19 infection. This is an outstanding conclusion. If the cause of death data itself is limited, how do we know it was in fact COVID-19? Could some of the treatments or interventions received, for instance, intubation, have influenced the fatal outcome of these women? This casts doubt on the study's robustness. The second study sourced isn't actually new at all either. It's from May 2020, and it's also not a study, but rather a letter to the editor. It was about universal testing of women for COVID to head into labor and delivery. It followed 215 pregnant women, with the vast majority of them, 84.6% to be exact, were SARS-CoV-2 negative. The sources do not mention testing of other respiratory viruses or bacteria, and since PCR testing is known to provide false positives depending on the cycle threshold used, it's possible that the symptoms are related to other pathogens. Overall, the correspondence focuses only on the PCR testing of pregnant women, but ignores the severity of cases, and it didn't evaluate transmission at all. It does not discuss COVID, nor the risk to develop it, and was done in 2020, so COVID was determined by variants that are no longer in circulation. The whole source is moot. Both of these publications predate vaccination, and there is no risk/benefit analysis done in relation to the incidence of adverse events determined by vaccination. And given that the current variants are less dangerous, a risk-benefit analysis in relation to vaccine adverse events in the context of a randomized controlled clinical trial cannot be overlooked or undermined. Neither of these communications or query analysis confirm what TO misleadingly concludes, that pregnant women who contract COVID-19 are at a greater risk of complications and death, and that COVID-19 vaccination effectively reduces the risk of severe disease and that same death. It's clear that the fact checkers are entangled with conflicts of interest, prioritizing profits over truth, and not capable of actually doing the legwork to present factual information, but rather are regurgitating their big pharma, big tech, and big gov influencers' talking points. Our unwavering independence from these influences is why people trust us and me to bring you the other, often unreported side of the story, which also makes us a target for those trying to discredit and silence our voices. But I will remain unwavering in my commitment to bringing you accurate and up-to-date scientific information. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. If you appreciate that I do not stand idly by while the fact checkers got away with their partisan, bought and paid for, attempted discrediting of my reliable report, then please consider supporting my work at mediafactcheck.ca. We can follow the facts wherever they may lead because, well, we are loyal only to you, our faithful donors and supporters. Thank you for your contribution at mediafactcheck.ca so I can continue to bring you these important reports just like this.